Have you ever been given your marching orders by a man in his underwear? That was my life before HubSpot. My name's Pete, I'm a RevOps strategist, and fundamentally RevOps is about telling stories about businesses. So here's one of mine, not a story about business, but a story from my ridiculous life before HubSpot. I was living in the mountains of Central Asia where it was so cold I once nearly lost my fingers whilst painting a table outside. But my colleague suggested to me that it would be a good idea to get out into nature a little bit, stop spending so much time indoors, and so we went off and took a trek in the mountains. So as we started to walk, we saw a building up to our right. We didn't know what it was, so we kept walking. And as we walked, we saw someone coming out of that building and then told us that we couldn't be there. He then said, "Wait here, I'm gonna go fetch somebody else," which frankly was our cue to leave. We could have simply left, but we stayed where we were. A good 5 minutes later, 9 men appeared from the building and walked down towards us. And we quickly realized that this was the army. They were wearing fatigues. However, the officer, the one we presumed was in charge, had clearly been rudely awakened, although frankly I don't remember it being that early in the morning, because he wasn't wearing fatigues. He was unbuttoned, he had a shirt unbuttoned, and might as well have been in his underwear. Nevertheless, the other 8 were carrying rifles, and a conversation soon started between my colleague who spoke the local language and the officer in charge. A conversation which, much to my dismay, started to get heated and more heated as my colleague began to shout at the guy in charge, which I distinctly remember being a bad idea and the worst thing you could possibly do to an officer in front of his men. Ultimately, everyone is a storyteller, and revenue operations is about releasing those stories. But we're not all suited for every genre. It wouldn't make sense for Agatha Christie to pen the screenplay for Rocky VII or Tom Clancy to write a trashy romance, which is why HubSpot shines as a storytelling tool. Using datasets, RevOps professionals can distribute the correct data to the right teams to allow them to tell the stories they should be telling. Given the right characters, that is the right data, your authors can tell their best stories. Eventually, the officer had had enough and he said something rather sharply to the troops under his command, at which point they raised their weapons and pointed them at us. I remember feeling a mixture of emotions, terror, obviously, but on the other hand, I'd recently read a news article that explained that 2 soldiers in the country had been eaten alive by wolves not too long ago because they didn't have any ammunition for their weapons. So I did wonder whether the rifles aimed at my head had any bullets in them. Still, when they cocked those rifles, I was terrified. There is a reason you hear that sound in the movies. It is terrifying. This was a real freeze, fight or flight moment, and I did think about running back down that mountain and wondered whether they had the ability to shoot me and whether they would have the audacity to shoot me. But I froze, and I did what they said. It turns out that the building from which they'd emerged was an army barracks, and they thought that we were spies. So they arrested us at gunpoint and marched us into the barracks that we weren't supposed to see because we might be spies. So here's the ridiculous tie-in. With Ops Hub, in HubSpot, you can share with your teams what it is that you want them to see. Give your authors the right data and the right characters to allow them to write their best stories. Get HubSpot, get Ops Hub Enterprise.